An early summer dusk softened over the marquee lights of the Memphis Coliseum in 1972. A hush rippled through the crowd as a lone figure paused before the grand entrance. An 11-year-old girl, her white cane trembling at her side, a faithful Labrador at her heels. Despite the roar inside, her world pulsed with nervous anticipation. This was more than a concert. It was her first glimpse of hope beyond darkness. But the guard at the gate saw only the dog and barked, "No animals allowed." Period confusion and fear clouded her face as murmurs rose from the line. Then, without warning, a voice cut through the tension. Deep, calm, unmistakable. The girl's head turned. The crowd went silent. And in that charged moment, the king of rock and roll stepped forward, ready to rewrite every rule they thought they knew. The rattling wheels of the overnight train groaned against rusted tracks as it carried young Sarah Jenkins and her mother away from their dusty Texas home toward the heart of Memphis. Sarah, 11 years old and blind since birth, sat on the narrow berth, her white cane leaning against the windowsill. Her faithful guide dog Rocco curled at her feet. The carriage was dimly lit by a single overhead lamp, its yellow glow dancing on the cracked linoleum floor. A faint murmuring of conversation drifted from the aisle, blending with the rhythmic clack-clack of the locomotive. A lullaby of travel that spoke of places Sarah had only dreamed of. In her lap lay a folded poster, its edges creased from careful handling. Even though she could not see the vibrant image of Elvis Presley in mid-song, Sarah felt its promise. The promise that soon she would hear the voice that had been her constant companion through dark nights and lonely days. Since her father's death in Vietnam, when she was but a toddler, her mother had soothed her with recordings of Elvis's gospel tunes and rock ballad croons. In those moments, she had felt a tether to something greater, an affirmation that beauty existed beyond her sightless world. Her mother, Clara Jenkins, sat opposite her, hands folded tightly in her lap. Each time the train shuddered around a bend, Clara brushed a stray lock of auburn hair from her daughter's forehead and offered a small, forced smile. She had scraped together every penny for the fare, selling off pieces of furniture and borrowing from neighbors. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment of triumph. Her child's dream was within reach. Sarah pressed her fingers to the edge of the poster, tracing the contours of an imagined face, the microphone's curve, the swirl of stage curtains. She inhaled deeply, tasting the stale air tinged with coal dust and anticipation. "Mama," she whispered, voice soft as the train's sigh. "Do you think he'll sing, If I Can Dream?" "For me?" Clara's throat tightened. She tucked a hand under Sarah's chin and tilted her daughter's face gently upward. "He'll sing whatever you need him to, sweetheart," she said. "Trust me." Hours blurred into one another. The dining car's hum drifted by, the clatter of dishes and clinking of spoons as weary passengers grabbed coffee and cold cuts. Sarah dreamed of the moment she would step off the train and breathe in the humid Memphis air, fragrant with magnolia blossoms and road-worn asphalt. She imagined the distant swell of an organ, the first gasp of a guitar chord, and then the first note of Elvis's voice, filling her world with a light she had never seen but had always believed in. When the train finally hissed to a stop, Sarah felt the gentle rock ease away. The conductor's barked instructions faded, replaced by the low rumble of engines and footsteps on gravel. Clara scooped up the poster, folded it gingerly, and tucked it inside her coat pocket. Rocco lifted his head, ears pricked, as if sensing the station's purpose. They stepped down onto the platform. Clara held Sarah's hand firmly. The platform lights were bright, but Sarah felt only warmth on her face and a multitude of voices calling out names, taxis, and directions. Somewhere behind her, the train pulled away into the night, carrying other travelers toward their own destinies. Clara led her daughter toward a waiting car with Memphis Music Foundation painted on the door. A volunteer lifted Sarah's small suitcase from the train's rack and set it gently in the trunk. Sarah's senses flooded. The creak of the car door, the rumble of the engine, the faint scent of Elvis's cologne on Clara's scarf, left over from her mother's embrace. As they drove through the quiet streets toward the concert hall, Sarah closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness, "I'm here now. I'm finally here." And somewhere in the back of her mind, she imagined Elvis's deep, resonant voice answering her call, ready to turn the world toward the light she could not see, but could feel with every fiber of her being. The line of eager ticket holders snaked around the side entrance of the concert hall, shadows stretching long across the pavement in the late afternoon sun. The heat was stifling, but the buzz of anticipation made the air crackle. Tonight, Elvis would perform. Mothers soothed restless toddlers, couples exchanged stories of past shows, and lifelong fans clutched well-worn photographs of the king on stage. Sarah Jenkins and her mother, Clara, approached the heavy double doors, Rocco padding faithfully at Sarah's side. Sarah felt the smooth, cool metal of the railing as Clara guided her forward. At the head of the queue, the uniformed guard regarded them with a clipboard in hand and a stern frown. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said without looking up, his voice clipped and efficient. "No animals allowed." Clara's heart sank. She stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "He's my daughter's guide dog. Without him, she can't enter." The guard glanced at Sarah's cane, then back at Rocco, whose calm brown eyes peered innocently into the guard's. "Policy," he repeated. "No exceptions." Sarah stood quietly, her chest tight with disappointment. She had dreamed of this night for months, imagining every note of Heartbreak Hotel and how the vibrations of Elvis's voice would resonate through her chest. All that hope now wavered under the bright lights of the marquee. Clara's cheeks flushed. A dozen spectators shifted uncomfortably, their chatter hushed as they sensed the tension. One man muttered about the unfairness of it all. Another couple exchanged sympathetic glances. Sarah's small hand trembled around the leash. Summoning courage, Sarah tried again. "Please, sir, Rocco helps me." Her voice was soft, but the guard silenced her with a brusque hand. "I'm sorry, little lady," he said, eyes averted. "No dogs." Tears sprang in Sarah's blind eyes as she opened her mouth to plead once more. But Clara, swallowing a sob, wrapped her arm around Sarah and guided her away from the entrance. A dull roar of disapproval sprang up behind them, but the guard remained unmoved. As they turned down the sidewalk, Clara's knees nearly buckled. She breathed in deeply to steady herself, but Sarah's quiet sobs shook her heart. Rocco leaned against Sarah's leg, offering what comfort he could through his steady presence. Meanwhile, inside the hall, Elvis Presley was finishing a sound check. The stage hands had left him alone under the spotlight, and his voice drifted through the speakers, warm, soulful, utterly his own. Yet in his dressing room he felt an itch of disquiet. Something wasn't right. The frantic energy that always sparked before a show had been replaced by an uneasy tug at his heart, as if someone out there needed him in a way no audience ever had. Back on the sidewalk, Clara murmured, "I'm so sorry, baby." She knelt beside Sarah, brushing away the tears. Sarah sniffled, then whispered, "I just wanted to hear him sing." Clara choked on her own tears. I know, sweetheart. I know. At that moment, a crisp, authoritative voice called from the entryway. Hold on! The crowd parted as Elvis, clad in a simple white shirt and jeans, stepped into the fading light. His presence drew a collective gasp. The guard stumbled back, conscious of the glare from the king himself. Clara froze. Sarah's small body quivered as Elvis strode toward them, Rocco's tail wagging with recognition. Sarah's hand tightened around her mother's. Elvis reached them and knelt down, meeting Sarah's eyes, even though she could not see him. He smiled gently. "Is this right?" he asked the guard, his tone calm but unyielding. The guard swallowed, glancing at the gathering crowd before stammering, I'm following the rules." Elvis rose, turning back to Sarah. "Come on," he said softly, placing one hand on her shoulder. "Let's show them there's a better way." Together, he and Sarah made their way past the silent guard, Rocco at her side. Clara followed, stunned as the press gathered, flashbulbs flickering in surprise. Inside, Elvis led Sarah to a seat just off the stage. The audience leaned forward as he tapped the microphone. He announced, "Tonight, my friend here has waited long enough. Let's give her a seat she belongs to." A surge of applause washed over them, gentle, reverent, a promise kept. Sarah's face lit with a joy she'd never known, and as she nestled into her chair, Rocco at her feet, Clara's tears fell freely. Elvis straightened, turned, and stepped onto the stage. Clara and Sarah listened, breathless, as the opening chords began. In that moment, a simple act of kindness rippled through the hall, reminding everyone that compassion could outshine rules, and that sometimes the king himself could be moved to knuckle under for a better cause. Late that same evening, when the world outside the little cafe had grown quiet under a canopy of stars, Elvis Presley slipped through the back door without fanfare. The scent of coffee and frying burgers lingered in the air. The low hum of the neon sign outside cast a violet glow around him as he walked across the linoleum to where Mary Ellen stood, wiping down tables. She glanced up, startled. She had expected no more than a standard day's end ghost. Evening crews usually trickled away by then. Yet here was a man in plain jeans and a soft white shirt, framed by shadows, stalwart and silent. By the flickering neon, his eyes held an intensity that startled her. Not the glare of someone demanding deference, but the warmth of someone who had seen the same world she knew, and recognized her place within it. He cleared his throat gently. "Mary Ellen?" Her breath caught. He spoke her name without introduction, yet his voice carried a familiarity akin to an old friend's. "Yes, sir," she managed. He extended a hand, and she realized she'd been holding a damp rag so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "I'm told you were let go earlier." Her heart sank. She had hoped the night's events would fade into memory. I'm sorry, but I didn't." Her voice faltered. He held up his palm, shushing her worry. "I know." He paused, studying her expression. "But I also know why you did it." Her throat tightened. "I didn't know." He shook his head. "I have some idea." He gestured toward the cafe's worn waiting area. "May I sit?" She led him to a small booth. He slid in opposite her, Rocco's gentle whine echoing from the corner. Sarah had fallen asleep, curled against Clara's shoulder in their car outside. All that remained was a hush broken only by distant crickets. Mary Ellen folded her hands in her lap. She felt as though she were meeting a stranger of monstrous fame. And yet, somehow, he felt deeply human. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice small. He glanced past her at the empty tables. "To thank you," he said simply, "for what you did tonight." She blinked. I didn't know it was you. I just saw a scared little girl. His gaze softened. That scared little girl could have been my own, or yours, or anyone's child. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You didn't hesitate to help, when most people walked on by. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. I was just doing my job. He shook his head. Number U went beyond. You gave your own meal to someone in need. Mary Ellen swallowed hard. It wasn't much. A full meal to a hungry child is everything, he answered. I've sung for millions, but tonight your kindness sang louder than any applause ever could. She exhaled a shaky laugh. I still have bills to pay. My mother's medicines don't wait for applause. He studied her face, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a plain, unmarked envelope. He placed it on the table, the weight of his gesture heavier than any words. Open it, please. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the flap. Inside lay a check, $5,000, neatly typed, and signed only with an initial. E.P. Beneath it, scrawled in familiar, looping handwriting. No strings attached, just so you can sleep easier. Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. I can't accept this. He shook his head gently. Then let me rephrase. I insist. She bowed her head. He could hear her heartbeat, rapid and uneven. But why? He leaned back, looking up at the beige ceiling with its single flickering bulb. Because when my world gets too loud, I long for the quiet truths, the moments when someone listens, when someone cares without expecting anything in return. He turned toward her, voice low and earnest. Tonight, you reminded me what the world looks like through unguarded eyes. She raised her gaze, surprised to see gratitude shining in his own. I thank you, she whispered. He nodded. My pleasure. Now, I have one more thing. He slid across the booth a second envelope, this one embossed with the cafe's logo and addressed to Mary Ellen West. Inside, an official letter, an offer of employment, a position as coordinator for the Presley Family Foundation, tasked with overseeing a newly established fund to aid working mothers and their families. Her breath caught. She looked up, meeting his eyes. A job? For real? He nodded. I can't fix everything, but I can offer a hand, if you'll take it. She swallowed, her mind racing. All at once, she saw the trembling child at the window, her mother's anxious face, the long shifts that stole her nights. Then she saw her own hands, once so quick to help another, now finally given a chance to build, rather than merely survive. She nodded, her voice barely more than a breath. Yes. He stood, offering her his hand. Rocco padded forward, tail wagging. Mary Ellen placed her palm in Elvis's, rising on unsteady legs. As he led her out the back door, the neon sign hummed on. The world beyond lay vast and uncertain, but in that moment, something had shifted. A legend had extended a lifeline, and a life once tethered by need was now buoyed by possibility. And as the door closed behind them, the cafe returned to its stillness, marked forever by a kindness that had transcended fame, an act that would echo far beyond those worn linoleum floors and neon lights. Nearly 6 months had passed since that humid night in the roadside cafe, and autumn's golden glow had settled over Memphis once more. Behind the gates of Graceland, a modest building stood quietly, the Presley Family Foundation Center, its windows warm with light even after dusk. Inside, Mary Ellen West, no longer just a young waitress, pored over paperwork, her hands steady despite the weight of her responsibilities. Volunteers bustled about, preparing care packages for single mothers, scheduling music lessons for their children, and organizing food drives for families struggling to make ends meet. That evening, a special invitation arrived, an annual benefit concert in the main ballroom, where artists gathered to celebrate the foundation's progress. Mary Ellen slipped into a simple yet elegant dress, the same shade of pale blue as her first day back at work. Her mother, seated in a wheelchair at her side, smiled as Mary Ellen finished pinning a small corsage to her lapel. Outside, the maple trees rustled, leaves drifting like confetti down the drive. Inside the ballroom, candles flickered on tables dressed in crisp linens. A soft murmur rose as guests found their seats. At the far end of the room, a single microphone stood before a modest stage draped in burgundy velvet. A hush fell when Elvis Presley himself appeared, dressed in a tailored black suit that spoke of quiet dignity rather than flash. He surveyed the crowd before his gaze settled on Mary Ellen and her mother. Their eyes met, and he nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. Taking the mic, he began in a voice that was equal parts warmth and authority. When I first walked into this cafe, I was looking for a quiet meal. Instead, I found someone who reminded me that true strength often wears no uniform. A gentle applause rose at the edge of the room. He gestured toward Mary Ellen's mother. This lady here is the reason we have this foundation. She faced hardship that would have broken many, yet she taught her daughter to stand tall. Mary Ellen felt her mother's hand squeeze hers. Her throat tightened as Elvis continued. Tonight, we celebrate not only music, but the power of compassion. Because when a stranger gives from her own table, she serves a feast of hope. He paused, as if choosing his next words with care, then smiled and asked the orchestra behind him to play the opening notes of If I Can Dream. As the gentle piano chords washed over the room, he stepped off the stage and approached Mary Ellen. Guiding her mother forward, he offered his arm so they could stand at his side. From her seat, Mary Ellen watched tears glisten on her mother's cheeks, tears of pride and gratitude. The other guests fell silent, many wiping their own eyes. Elvis lifted his free hand in a subtle invitation, as though he were drawing strength from her presence. The melody rose, swelling with the promise that better days can follow dark times. When the final chord faded, applause thundered like rolling waves, yet Mary Ellen felt as though the only sound that mattered was her own steady heartbeat. In that moment, star and servant stood equal, one sharing a song, the other offering her life in service of others. Later, as the crowd dispersed into the crisp night, Mary Ellen stepped outside with her mother. The moon cast everything in silver light, and the magnolia blossoms bloomed ghostly white. Elvis approached quietly, handing Mary Ellen a folded program. Inside, among the artist credits, was a simple line he had requested be printed in the smallest typeface. For every act of kindness, the world grows a little brighter. He bade her good night with a warm embrace, then slipped away into the shadows of the estate, leaving Mary Ellen with a heart full enough to light 100 rooms. Decades later, long after the lights at Graceland had flickered off for the final time, Mary Ellen's voice could still be heard. Now, as the director of a sprawling network of community centers, each one echoing the lessons learned that steamy Memphis afternoon. At the head of every program, the Foundation's emblem bore a silent tribute to the man who had shown that real greatness shines not from a stage, but from the hands that lift those in need. And as long as those centers stood, so too did the promise that a single kindness, offered without hesitation, can resonate across lifetimes, a testament to the unspoken power of seeing the world through the eyes of compassion.